Well, hello again, my friends, and welcome once more to the Invisible College. And I've got a very interesting lecture for you today. They're rather different from our usual ones because we're dealing with something contemporary. The whole what's going on really in the world today. The biggest news story going, which is this invasion of Ukraine by Vladimir Putin and his forces that he sent from Russia. And we're going to approach this in a rather different perspective from the usual. You know, I'm sure you've been watching a lot of things on TV, people talking about this. We're going to look at this from a very different point of view. I'm going to start looking into the question of, is Vladimir Putin the Antichrist? And I think you're going to be very interested in this because I'm going to give you a lot of information that you probably don't know about. That's going to give a different twist to all of what we're reading in our newspapers and seeing on TV. So stick with it. If you haven't already subscribed to this channel, please do. Please give the video a like. Ring that little bell. I know all those things. You get it from everyone, I know. And it's a real pain, but I'm really trying hard to get this channel to grow, got to have 1,000 followers, and we're at 816 now, I think. So it's just a little bit more to go, and that could change the algorithm with YouTube, and we can get this out much more to other people. So anyway, I'm not going to bore you with all that. Let's get on with the lecture that we have here, which is Vladimir Putin the Antichrist? I think if you're a Ukrainian, you probably would say, I don't need to ask that question, I know. Anyway, it's not something that I've posed myself initially. This Ukrainian archbishop calls Putin the Antichrist of our time. And I should point out that when it says the Antichrist, there can be more than one, you know. We're looking at when you think of the Antichrist, you're normally thinking of the person that's going to come along just before Jesus Christ returns to earth. That's what people think of anyway. But there have been anyone who's against Christ is an Antichrist. And there have been many throughout history, starting with the Emperor Nero, for example, who was the first one to persecute the Christians in Rome. And then Diocletian, another emperor of Rome, also persecuted the Christians horribly. And there have been many others like that, including, I have to say, Muhammad. Yes, I know Jesus is mentioned in the Quran, but Islam has always been very hard on Christians. So this is something we have to think about. We're putting Vladimir Putin, we're calling him, is he the Antichrist of our time? There have been others in the past before this. So let's look at this question and see where it takes us, because I think you're going to find this rather sort of interesting and different. Now in this lecture we're going to explore this idea and see if it holds any sort of reality. To do so, we're going to look at the history of Russia in the light of history and prophecy. Now I want us first to look at the Bible. And before I go into that picture there, one of the major books in the Bible for prophecy is the book of Daniel. And if you haven't read that, I recommend it. It's not very long. It's a sort of what I would call the prequel to the last book in the Bible, the Apocalypse, or the book of Revelation. And Daniel lived at the time when the Jews were transported from Jerusalem to Babylon, and they had to live there for 70 years before they were allowed to return back to Jerusalem. And Daniel was, he became a kind of king's right-hand man, actually, because his prophecies were so accurate and he was so clearly a man of God. So anyway, Daniel had, interpreted dreams, his own dreams, and also the dreams of King Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon, who transported the Jews in the first place. So we'll go back to that picture of the statue, and we'll take it from there. So Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and in his dream he saw a statue, and the statue had a golden head. It had a silver sort of breast area, bronze sort of hips and upper thighs, and then it had iron legs, and then feet at the bottom, which were made from a mixture of iron and clay. We're told all that in Daniel, in the book of Daniel. And the king doesn't know what to do with this dream. His astrologers and soothsayers, none of them can interpret it. I think he can't remember what it was, but he certainly won't tell them. And they say, well, how can we interpret your dream if you can't tell us? So eventually Daniel is brought forward, and he agrees that he will try to find out what the king's dream was and then interpret it for him. And God sends him the dream, and then he's able to go back to the king and give him the interpretation. It says here in the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had a troubling dream of a statue, part gold, silver, bronze, and iron, and finally toes of iron mixed with clay. Daniel informs the king the statue symbolizes a succession of 4 empires. These begin with his own and culminate with what will be the Roman Empire. Of course, Daniel doesn't know it's going to be a Roman Empire. He just says there will be this Iron Empire. And this will be followed by 10 successor states to the Roman Empire. So clearly the 10 toes are to be understood as 2 groupings of 5. You've got 5 on each foot. And 1 5 would descend from the Western Roman Empire and the other from the Eastern Roman Empire. I'll explain those terms shortly. So there are going to be 10 successor states vying for power represented by these toes. Now later on, Daniel has a dream of his own, and in this he sees 4 symbolic beasts come out of the sea. This gives him more details about these empires that he's seen in the king's dream. And the 4 beasts symbolize the same 4 great empires as prophesied earlier in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And these beasts are winged lion, which is the Babylonian Empire, and actually that was a symbol that the Babylonians used, the winged lion. A bear, which was the Medo-Persian Empire. A 4-headed leopard, which is the Greek Empire. It has 4 heads because this empire was founded by Alexander the Great. But after he died, his empire was divided among his generals, his 4 generals. Yet it was still all the Greek Empire. So it's the single empire, but with 4 heads. And then there would be a terrible beast. I think it was probably a wolf, but Daniel would never have seen a wolf. He didn't know what they were. But he describes it as a terrible beast with big teeth and claws. And that's going to be the Roman Empire that comes after the Greek. And that's got 10 horns on it. And Daniel is told that the 4th beast will be the most powerful of all. It was terrifying, dreadful, and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped on what was left with its feet. So that's all in the book of Daniel. This was, of course, the Roman Empire. It conquered what was left of the Greek Empire, including Egypt, Asia Minor, Syria, and the Levant in the east. In addition, it grew a vast empire in the west. These were lands unknown to the other empires, comprising Italy, Spain, North Africa, Gaul, Britain, parts of Germany, and the Balkans. So the Roman Empire is much larger than these others. Certainly, it's larger in the west. I guess the Empire of Alexander had large holdings further east, obviously going through Persia and Afghanistan. So that's kind of pretty big as well. The beast of Daniel's vision also has 10 horns. This seems to echo the 10 toes of the statue seen in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Now, I've gone into all of this in great detail in 3 lectures that I did on the book of Daniel, so I'm going to just very quickly go through these. I'm not, I'm not just rushing here. If you want to know more, go and watch those other lectures. As I say, there's 3 on the book of Daniel. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the Roman Empire was symbolized by the 2 legs of the statue. In fact, the Roman Empire did divide into 2 halves. So here we can see the late Roman Empire. And this division of the original Roman Empire took place initially at the time of the pagan emperor Diocletian. He set up separate governments in the east and west as a means of better managing it. Each part would have its own Augustus and Caesar. And I should just explain those terms a minute. You've all heard of Julius Caesar. We should pronounce that Julius Caesar. It's a hard C, not a soft. No, see, it shouldn't be sounded like an S, as we do in English. It should be more like a K. So Julius Caesar, he was the great general who conquered Gaul and Britain. Well, he didn't conquer Britain, he invaded Britain, and was later assassinated. And we'll talk a bit more about him maybe later. And he, after he died, there was a civil war, and his nephew, Octavius Augustus, came out of it on top, and he became the first emperor proper of Rome. So the title of the emperor was Augustus throughout the following history of the Roman Empire. Emperors took the name and title of Augustus, and they had a junior colleague who was called a Kaiser or Caesar. And he would, in time, inherit the Augustus title, normally speaking. So he would start off as a Kaiser, and then he would move to becoming a full-on Augustus. That was kind of how they thought of it anyway. It didn't always work out that way, because there's a lot of rebellions and ups and downs and different emperors, but that's kind of how they thought that it would work out. So it was split in half. So you had a western half and an eastern half. In 324 AD, the Emperor Constantine, a Christian convert, founded Constantinople as a new capital in the east. Rome continued as the capital of the west. Now, Constantine, he had started out in the west. His father had been the Augustus of the west, Constantine Chlorus, and Constantine himself had been in the east serving the emperor there, but he feared for his life, and he flew west. He got to Britain and joined his father in Britain, and soon after his father died, the army proclaimed him emperor, and then he marched back, took over Rome, and then he went and fought a war against the eastern emperor, conquered that, and he became emperor of the whole lot. And he also became a Christian. So he founded a new capital in the east at what was then named, it had been Byzantium, and he renamed it Constantinople, the city of Constantine, and is now called Istanbul. So that became the eastern capital. So in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, these divisions are prophesied and symbolically by the 2 legs of the statue. Right, so you can see the 2 legs there, one standing on Rome and the other standing on Constantinople. So these are really, it was a prophetic dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, that there would be these two iron legs. And the Roman Empire as a whole was symbolized by the double-headed eagle, which had 2 heads, and I'm sure you've seen this emblem. Double-headed eagle, 2 heads, Rome and Constantinople, but only one body, which is still the United Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire was still one, but it had 2 different capitals, administering the two halves of it. And in theory, that was a good way of stopping civil wars, which had plagued Rome before the empire, that they could share the power and maintain the empire for the good of everyone. And the Roman Empire gave birth to two further empires of the north. And I'm going to go into this in some detail. The first was the Holy Roman Empire, which occupied pretty much what is now Germany, which has morphed into the core of the EU. So what we now think of as the EU, the core of it, is actually the same pretty much as the Holy Roman Empire, which actually included not just Germany but France initially as well, although not for very long. They broke away. But the Frankish Empire, the Holy Roman Empire of Charlemagne, did include France or Gaul as well. So the Western Roman Empire was repeatedly invaded by barbarians throughout most of the 4th and early 5th centuries AD. It officially ended in 476. And as you probably know, Rome was sacked in 410. I think it was by the Visigoths. But it was sacked a number of times. People like the Vandals sacked it. But they managed to bounce back for a while, but then eventually in 476, with the death of the last emperor killed in battle, that was the end of the Western Roman Empire. However, in 800 AD, right, so that's over 300 years later, Charlemagne, already king of the Franks, was crowned by the Pope as Emperor of the Romans. And I should say that Holy Roman Empire, what we got on the map here, it should include France at this point. It was bigger than that. Although this empire was mostly situated in what is now Germany, it was called the Holy Roman Empire. And I'm sure you've heard the joke, well, it was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. Well, that was certainly true later on. But it was initially set up and blessed by the Pope, and it did include, Rome and northern Italy at the time. It was seen as the successor state to the Roman Empire. Thus, the Holy Roman Emperor adopted the Roman insignia of the double-headed eagle. This empire lasted till 1806, when it was abolished by Napoleon, so that's 6 years before he invaded Russia. And Germany united, Germany united under the Prussian monarchy in the 1870s. And we did all this when I was at school in history, the unification of Germany in the 1870s. That was a very interesting period of history. And they adopted the single-headed eagle, which I believe had been the insignia of the Prussian. It mustn't get these two mixed up. Prussia, with a P, is part of Eastern Germany, a large chunk of it. Russia, of course, is what we know as Russia. So the Prussians, the East Germans, had the single-headed eagle, the Hohenzollern family. And that's kind of what was adopted by Germany. And then that was taken over later by the Nazis. Today, Germany retains the single-headed eagle as a national symbol, but without the swastika. That's all gone. Germany's not Nazi at all now. It's a democracy, but they still retain the old eagle symbol because that goes all the way back to the Holy Roman Empire, although they've lost one of the heads, and it faces westwards now. Meanwhile, long after the dissolution of the Western Roman Empire in 578, the Eastern or Byzantine Empire continued for a further 1,000 years. It had its capital at Constantinople, Byzantium, which is the gateway to the Black Sea from the Mediterranean. You can see that. If you go up past Greece, between Greece and what we would call Turkey now, it takes you up and you can go through that strait into what's called the Sea of Marmara, that small sea, and then you have to cross through this narrow channel at Constantinople to get into the Black Sea. So that channel there is very important from a trade point of view, and was understood as such by Constantine, which is why he put his capital city there. At its greatest extent, the Byzantine Empire included large parts of the former Western Empire. In Italy, North Africa and part of Spain. What happened was that the Western Empire had been sacked by Vandals and people, and large chunks of it lost. But as the Eastern Empire got stronger again, they decided that they were going to win that back, and they went to Egypt, they conquered that, and large chunks of North Africa and into Spain, Italy, at least for a time, and Greece. So they kind of won back quite a bit of the Western Empire and included it into the Byzantine Empire. So between 532 and 537 AD, the huge church of Hagia Sophia was built on the instructions of Justinian I, the greatest of the Byzantine emperors. It's under his rule that Western territories were reconquered for the Byzantine Empire. The eastern part of the empire stretching down into the west. And by far the largest church in Christendom, it boasts the first great church dome. So that is a huge dome on top. I'm not sure if it's still the largest church in Christendom, probably not. I should think there's some huge basilicas in America, much bigger than this now. But it's certainly, from as ancient churches go, it is the biggest. It's huge. Very impressive. And this church was the seat of the Patriarch of Constantinople, one of the four most senior clerics of the East, and ultimately its most influential. The other patriarchs were Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria, and all those cities were conquered by the Muslims long before the fall of Constantinople. So it remained the only major church in the East for quite a number of centuries. And so the Patriarch of Constantinople became the senior patriarch of the East, not because of the founding of the church, it was later than the other ones, but because it was the only one that still had some kind of power. And from here, missionaries went out to convert the pagans on the other side of the Black Sea. These people called the Rus. Now, I'll just say a few words about the Rus. The Rus, that we now call the Russians, they owe their origins primarily to Vikings who came down the rivers from up by the Baltic Sea in Scandinavia, came down the rivers, and they could go down one river and then move across to another one. And eventually they could follow the river systems down to the Black Sea. And one of the major rivers, of course, is the Dnieper, which runs down through Ukraine now. And the big city of Kiev was the first major Russian city to be founded of the Rus. And that's where these missionaries went to. They went to Kiev, which is, so much in the news today. In 1054, there occurred the Great Schism between the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Western or Catholic Church. This was very much to do with the Pope claiming that he was the most senior cleric. He was in the successor of Peter. Peter had founded the Church of Rome, therefore he was his successor, therefore he must be the most senior cleric. But actually Peter had founded the Church of Antioch as well, and maybe the Church of Jerusalem, you could say. So I mean, it was actually a bit of a cheek, let's put it that way. But Rome was getting back on its feet by this time, and Western Church, with France and Germany and Britain and so on, was very powerful, and Constantinople was very weak. So the Eastern Orthodox didn't want to be dominated, so they split away. However, Constantinople still boasted the largest and most famous church in all of Christendom, Hagia Sophia. It certainly was at that time. It was the chief seat of the Eastern Orthodox branch of Christianity, just as St. Peter's in Rome was the Western or Catholic Church. Following the arising of Islam in 632, the Byzantine Empire gradually shrank in size as more and more of its territory was taken by the Muslims. So places like the Holy Land with Jerusalem and Antioch, which is kind of in that armpit of between Turkey and the Levant, opposite Cyprus. It's sort of in that armpit is where Antioch is. That was another of the big church places with a patriarch. Alexandria in northern Egypt. I mean, Egypt was conquered by the Muslims. So Constantinople was kind of on its own, and it's just a little enclave. By 1450, that's all they had left, was just that little enclave there and a couple of bits in Greece and a few islands in the Mediterranean. That's all that was left of the Byzantine Empire, which still called itself Rome, by the way. They refer to it as the Roman Empire still. And in 1453, Constantinople itself fell to the Ottoman Turks. And they were Muslims, and so the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia was transformed into a mosque. And they removed or covered up all Christian iconography and displaced the priesthood. And that's why you've got these minarets around the Hagia Sophia. The building's still there. It's because it became a mosque. And then for about 100 years, well, a bit less than that, after Ataturk ended the Sultanate of Turkey, he made it into a museum. Didn't want this sort of clash between Christians and Muslims to go on, who should own that church or mosque. But it's now been re-mosquified, if that's the right term, by President Erdogan just a few years ago, much to the annoyance of the Americans and also the Orthodox people, in particularly Russia. So anyway, a lot of history around that building. If you ever get a chance to go to Istanbul, do visit it. I'm sure you will do, because it is a fantastic place. And the Christian Orthodox patriarchs were left without a cathedral, and the old empire which had supported the church was no more. Something had to be done. A solution to the problem was found in Kiev, now the capital city of Ukraine, or I should say in the history of Kiev, rather than Kiev itself. The Hagia Sophia Cathedral in Kiev, the first church of the Russians, had been founded in the 8th century by Christian missionaries from Constantinople. This is the first church of Russia. I think it's the first church at all, but it's certainly the first major church of the Russians in Kiev. And from here, missionaries had gone out. Other churches were founded among the Rus, and these churches became the cathedrals of Novgorod and later on Moscow. I should say that Novgorod was a city further north than Kiev, and that became the capital of the Rus after the time of the Mongol invasions. And the Mongols invaded in the 13th century. They destroyed Kiev, left that church in ruins. The sort of capital of the Russians moved to Novgorod, and the archbishop, the patriarch, went to Novgorod. And then later on Moscow was founded, and the patriarchate moved to Moscow, where it is now. And now you can see Moscow, St. Basil's Cathedral. I must say those domes are really quite amazing, aren't they, those onion domes? I'd love to go and see it sometime, but not at the moment. By the 15th century, Moscow had declared its own patriarchate separate from the patriarchs of Constantinople and the other heads of the Greek Orthodox Church. And this was the origins of the Russian Orthodox Church. So we've had the split between the Catholics, the Roman Catholics of the West, and the Orthodox of the East. And now we're getting a split within Orthodoxy itself between the Greek Orthodox, who look to the Patriarchate of Constantinople, and the Russian Orthodox, who now are self-determining, and they have their archbishopric and patriarchate in Moscow, and they don't report to anyone. They don't see any other churches higher than them. Consequently, when Constantinople fell in 1453, the Kingdom of Muscovy, that's what the area around Moscow was called at that time, took over its mantle as protector of all Orthodox Christians. It in effect became the Holy Roman Empire of the East. Now that's an important thing to note, that now the Russians are forming something which is the equivalent of the Holy Roman Empire of the West, and they're forming their own Holy Roman Empire of the East. And this is why, like the Holy Roman Emperors of the West had done centuries earlier, the Russian kings took over the double-headed eagle of the Roman Empire. They used this emblem to emphasize that their authority over Orthodox Christians was legitimate. They thought of their empire as the continuity of the Eastern Roman Empire of Constantinople. So just as the Holy Roman Empire in the West, just as the Pope crowned Charlemagne as Emperor of the West, so the new the Kaiser, the Tsars of the East were now seeing themselves as heads of the continuity of the Eastern Roman Empire of Constantinople. And the new emperors also took the title Tsar rather than king. And this title derived from the name of Julius Caesar. For though he was murdered before he could be crowned, he was effectively the founder of the Roman Empire. Now, this is important. And this came about in practice, the empire itself came about in practice after his nephew Augustus defeated his rivals and established himself as imperator or dictator of Rome in 31 BC. Prior to this, Rome had been, at least in theory, a republic. So the Romans had got rid of their kings back in the 6th century, and there'd been a republic, and Julius Caesar was moving towards being crowned as king, and that's why he was assassinated by the senators. They didn't want to see the end of their republic, of democracy, a certain amount of democracy anyway. But the murder of Caesar or Kaiser didn't sort out their problems. The conspirators were hunted down by Julius Caesar's nephew, Octavius, and his Caesar's former lieutenant, who was Antony. They hunted down and caught up with people like Brutus and Cassius and the rest of the conspirators, and they were all killed. And then there was a civil war between Octavius and Antony, which Octavius came out of on top, and he became the first emperor, gave himself the name Augustus. So that all happened. He became first emperor in 31 BC. So it was the end of the Republic anyway, just 13 years later than the murder of Caesar. Now the laurel wreath is another symbol that was much used by the Roman Empire. During the earlier Roman Republic, it symbolized victory. Victorious generals would be awarded a laurel crown and then parade through the streets to the adulation of the crowds. So, you've heard the saying, look to your laurels, or he's been awarded the laurels. That's why it symbolizes victory. And then it came to symbolize the Roman state. And SPQR, I think it means something like Senatus Publique Romani. So it means the Senate and people of Rome. So that became kind of like a seal of the Roman Empire. And they put it on all sorts of things, on banners, on milestones, all sorts of things. After the Republic was dissolved and the Empire started, it changed its meaning. Thenceforward, it signified the authority of the state in the name of the emperor. And we can see here, remember in the Bible it talks about render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. I'll tell you, some of you maybe haven't read the Bible. So there's a story that Jesus is preaching, and the Pharisees, the Jewish priesthood of the time, come up and they challenge him, and there's a lot of aggravation about paying tax to Rome, as you can imagine. And they said to Jesus, is it lawful that we should have to pay tax to Rome? That's a trick question, because if he says yes it is, it means he's a Roman quisling. If he says no, then he could be in trouble with the Roman authorities. So it's a trick question intended to trip him up. And so what Jesus does is he says, hand me a coin. They go in their pocket and they pull out a coin, hand it to him. And he says, whose face is on this coin? Whose portrait is it? And they say, well, it's Caesar's. And he says, well, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, and unto God what is God's. And that's an answer they can't deal with. It takes the steam out, the wind out of their sails. Anyway, so this is a denarius, Tiberius, who ruled as Roman emperor AD 14 to 37. And this would have covered the period when Jesus was teaching, when he was alive. So it's very likely a coin like this is what he was talking about. And you can see here a picture of Caesar. And you can see that he's wearing the laurels. And in imperial coins of ancient Rome always had the emperor's portrait with him wearing the laurels. So the emperor, by definition, he is a hero. He's the guy, you know. He doesn't have to go out and win these laurels. He's got them already because he's the emperor. So that's kind of an important emblem to do with the Roman Empire. And you saw the SPQR version of that as well. Well, I thought it interesting here, when you look at this Russian general, I think this is the guy who's been sent to go and destroy eastern Ukraine in this present war. I think he was the one who was destroyed a big city in Syria. Thus, the laurel sprigs of a general are another hidden symbol of the old Roman Empire that was adopted by the Russians. We see them here on the uniform of the new head of the Russian army invading Ukraine. Now look at his collar there. He's got laurel sprigs on it. And on his collar are 2 sprigs of laurel leaves. This seems to be common on the uniforms of all Russian generals, from what I can tell. We also see laurels on his cap, along with the double-headed eagle of the Russian Empire. These symbols imply that, at least in their own eyes, Russia is still to be considered the legitimate successor to the Roman Empire. So I want to make that point here, that they're still using these Roman symbols, and they're still using the double-headed eagle, which was used by the Romanovs before the Russian Revolution. So they're still using that symbol, saying that we are the successor state of the Roman Empire. And I'm doing all I do in the name of the emperor, in the name of, and I'm wearing his laurels. So Vladimir Putin himself has been president of the Russian Federation on and off since 1999. And he sees himself as a new Tsar of Russia and wants to rebuild its greatness. Oh yeah, you bet he does. And he is rumoured to be the richest man in Russia. However, unlike so many oligarchs, he doesn't flaunt his wealth. He prefers to keep it private. In fact, he has oligarchs looking after his money for him. And he's reckoned to be worth in excess of £200 billion, or dollars anyway. That's a lot of money. I mean, he's up there in the Elon Musk level of wealth, maybe even richer. However, he lives like an emperor, as well as his Moscow dacha. I mean, that's your country estate outside Moscow. They call them dachas, and you can bet his dacha is top of the range, as it were. He has a huge and luxurious holiday palace near Sochi on the Black Sea. It's where they held the Winter Olympics, when Russia was hosting the Winter Olympics, on the Black Sea at Sochi. And he's also rumoured to have a large underground bunker in Siberia, should nuclear war break out. And of course he has a massive yacht. Like all communists, he's a total hypocrite. Yeah, and I'd like to point out about this bunker. I mean, he's quite happy to say, well, you know, you crossed the line and we'll use nuclear weapons on you. I guess he's got in the back of his mind that I'll be all right, my family will be all right, we'll be in our bunker. Which is a pretty crass thing to say, or to think even. Because if nuclear war breaks out on this planet and both sides start throwing their arsenals at each other, it's going to wipe out all life. And never mind being in your bunker, you can't live there forever. And if all life has been wiped out off the face of the earth, you haven't got a future either. So it's pretty stupid. Russia, though smaller than the old Soviet Union, is still by far and away the largest country in the world. Apparently it's not big enough for Putin. As his legacy, he wants to conquer as much as possible of the former Soviet Union lands. Yeah, he's not prepared to give up anything. You know, even little Georgia and other little bits and pieces he wants. He's not happy unless he's got the whole lot back. And this is the real reason why he has launched his invasion of Ukraine, which, though large compared with European countries, is tiny in comparison with Russia. And you can see I've put a ring around Ukraine. Actually, that ring is bigger than Ukraine. And just look how big Russia is. And it's got huge resources. Very few people, sparsely populated. The climate is cold. It's vicious most of the time. But despite that, underneath that permafrost, there's enormous riches. There's gold, there's mineral wealth, there's oil, there's gas, there's all sorts of stuff. You would have thought that would be enough to work on, but he must have Ukraine as well. Now, when Constantinople fell to the Turks in 1453, Moscow took over its mantle as defender of Orthodox Christianity. And there you can see the Patriarch of Moscow. During the communist era, many churches and monasteries were destroyed. Christianity was abolished, but it resurfaced after the breakup of the Soviet Union. Today, Putin sees the Russian Orthodox Church as a unifying factor as he attempts to rebuild the Russian Empire of the Tsars. In this endeavour, he has formed an alliance with the Patriarch of Moscow. He compares himself, that's Putin, with the former Tsars, especially Catherine the Great, who, like himself, seized Crimea for the Russian Empire. So he sees himself as in the same lineage, as it were, as people like Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, Ivan the Terrible, unifying Russia. Maybe have to break a few eggs in the process, maybe kill a few million people, but it's going to be done. We're going to sort it out. We're going to get it back. Now, in 2019, the Church of Kiev split from the Patriarchate of Moscow. It sought and received the blessing of the Patriarch of Constantinople to form a separate patriarchate of its own. So we've had the split of the Orthodox from the Catholics, in 1054, I think it was. And then we've had the split of the Russian Church, the Patriarchate of Moscow, from Constantinople. We now have the Kiev splitting off from Moscow and going directly to the Patriarch of Constantinople to form a separate patriarchate of its own. It's got its own patriarch now. It's not under the Church of Moscow, not in its own view anyway. This has infuriated the Moscow Patriarchate, and undoubtedly is one of the reasons why Putin is so intent on capturing Kiev. He wants to put an end to this breakaway Orthodox Church and have it back under the control of the Moscow priesthood. In fact, he wants to abolish the country of Ukraine altogether. Along with Belarus, the Baltic states and Finland, he wants to bring it back into the Russian Empire. His vision is to rebuild the empire as it was prior to World War I, even if the old Soviet imperium is beyond his reach. So I just want to put in a few words here. It seems to me that the biggest problem and the cause, really, I think, of this Russia-Ukraine war is that Russia, or certainly Putin, doesn't see Ukraine as being a separate country. He sees it as a breakaway, rebellious province of Russia. maybe 30 years old, it is 30 years old since it broke away. So he sees this as being more like a civil war. It's a bit like the American Civil War when the southern states broke away from the north and said, we're going to do our own thing, thank you very much, we don't want to be part of you anymore. And the north, wasn't going to have that. So you had this big war, the American Civil War. He sees this as being these individual wars that he's been picking on different states that were Russian but are no more, bringing them back into the Russian Federation as dealing with rebels who've revolted against the authorized successor state to the Roman Empire and to Constantinople, which is Russia. Therefore, they have to be punished and they have to be brought back in. And if it means destroying them, if it means destroying cities, if it means killing lots of people, so be it. Yeah, they've been disobedient. That's how he sees it. Ukrainians, of course, don't see it like that at all. They say, look, this is our country, this is our state. We don't want to be part of your federation, thank you very much. Yes, you did overwhelm us and conquer us and held us for captives for a few hundred years, but we've got out of that. We're not going to go back. Thank you very much. We don't want to be your slaves. Actually, what we want is we want to be like Poland and these other countries to the west of us who seem to have a better standard of living. They have a democracy. They're growing. They're doing well. We want to be like them. We don't want to be like you. Thank you very much. So this is the tension, and this is what's fueling this war. But there is more to it even than that, and we're going to go into that now. So is Putin the Antichrist? Well, there do seem to be some connections. Yeah, there are some connections. He is acting rather dictatorially, and he doesn't seem to have much problem with killing Christians, even if he proclaims himself to be best friends with the Patriarch of Moscow and to go to church and light candles and go skinny dipping in icy water and things like this that he does. But is he really a Christian? Well, I don't think so. I think he's a really cruel, horrible man myself. Anyway, the rebirth of the Roman Empire seems to be one prophecy of the book of Revelation. Yes. And the false prophet and the Antichrist all seems to be connected with that. So let's look again at the book of Revelation a bit. And the beast of Revelation. I've done lots of lectures on this. If you're not familiar with my channel, I've done I think 20 lectures on the book of Revelation alone, as well as the ones on the book of Daniel, and other lectures too, many other lectures. So you will find that there are in much more detail about the beast of Revelation, the number 666, Scarlet Whore of Babylon, all those kind of things which you find in the book of Revelation. But I'm just going to say a few words here in connection with what we've been talking about. Now, the passage in the Revelation is this that's important here. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems, and a diadem is a jewel which represents a rulership, on its horns, and blasphemous names on its heads. Blasphemous names means the denial of God. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power, and his throne, and great authority. So we got this leopard, we got bear, we got lion, specifically mentioned. The dragon is, of course, Satan. The beast is highly symbolic. It will be a world empire with some similarities to the old Roman Empire, but is really more than this. Its power, we are told, comes from a 7-headed dragon, symbolizing Satan. Now, although the beast is a new empire, it has vestiges of all the old empires of Daniel's vision. The 10 horns suggest that it represents a rebirth of the old Roman Empire. That's because the Roman Empire, we had the 10 toes representing 5 kingdoms in the west and 5 in the east, 5 rulerships. So that gives 10, and we've got 10 horns here. Again, representing rulerships because they carry diadems. So that gives us a link with the old Roman Empire. The lion's head is vestige of the old Babylonian Empire. Now you can see here the images for the different empires in Daniel. Babylon is this winged lion in his dream. The feet of the bear refers to the Medo-Persian Empire, because the bear in Daniel's vision, or his dream, represented Medo-Persia. The body of a leopard is a reference to the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great. And Russia sees itself as lord of the Greek Orthodox world. It does. It has 4 heads because Alexander's empire split into 4 parts with his generals, but it was still the Greek Empire. So is Vladimir Putin the Antichrist? I think we are entitled to ask that in light of all of this information. Actually, I don't think so. But I have an intuition that he is the reincarnation of someone else. And this, I think, should send certain shivers down our spines. This personage is perhaps the most famous of all Rome's rulers, Julius Caesar. Now I'm going to explain this. There's a bust of Caesar as a young man. Of course, I have no proof for this other than intuition, but let's compare their narratives. Caesar came to power first as a politician, not a soldier. At the time, Rome was in political turmoil as powerful oligarchs and generals vied for power. He used his political skills to good effect and became one of a triumvirate of leaders. So this is kind of similar to Putin's time, which the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, after the Berlin Wall came down, and the Soviet Union fell apart, and Yeltsin took over as president of the Russian Federation. So that was kind of a time of turmoil in Russian history. And Putin managed somehow to worm his way in with Yeltsin and to become his lieutenant. And when Yeltsin, who was a drunkard, not at all well, when he eventually was unable to do anything, he kind of put Putin in charge. That's how Putin got into power, and he became the next president. Everyone thought, well, actually, he's a young man, he's all right, he'll sort us out. So it's times of turmoil and trouble that offer opportunities for these kind of people. And Caesar was the same. They formed a triumvirate of himself, Pompey and Crassus. Crassus was a banker, but he'd also been a military leader, putting down the Spartacus rebellion. So to progress his ambitions, he used his appointment as governor of the small Roman province in southern Gaul as an opportunity to gain glory. In 58 BC, he began a campaign for the conquest of all of Gaul, and even invaded Britain in 54 BC and again in 55 BC and again in 54 BC. In 51 BC, he conquered all of Gaul, which roughly corresponds to what is now France, Belgium, and the west bank of the Rhine, and part which is now in Germany, a place like Cologne. And he achieved this with exceptional cruelty. He perpetrated a genocide among the Gauls, reportedly 1 million killed and a further million enslaved. According to Plutarch, this was 2/3 of the entire population of Gaul. In the process, he destroyed 800 cities. So that gives you some idea of the ruthlessness of Julius Caesar in his ambition to become, the Mr. Big in Rome, that he would do that to this prosperous country of Gaul, previously independent of Rome, which he now subjugated. Caesar returned from Gaul to fight a civil war against the forces of his former colleague and triumvir Pompey. And in 44 AD, he was already dictator of Rome, and it looked like he would be crowned. Yeah, the Romans were going to offer him the crown. If he had been crowned, it would have ended the Roman Republic, which had not been ruled by a king since 509 BC. Thus it was that as he came out of the Senate, Caesar was set upon by a dozen or so conspirators. Aged 65, he died on the spot. He was stabbed goodness knows how many times. There are a lot of enemies in Rome. So what about Putin? And is he the reincarnation of Caesar? Obviously, Putin is not a genetic relative of Julius Caesar. However, I think there is a certain similarity of looks. And this happens with souls as they reincarnate. People don't only look like their genetic forebears, but bring with them certain traits from previous lives. And I've seen this with other people. You see someone who you know that all their forebears have been British, and yet there's something Chinesey looking about them. And you can get the same thing with other groups and nations and races, that you think, oh, why does he look that, he looks a bit Chinesey, or a bit African, or it might be someone who's African. He looks very European. And it can be that they brought in something of their previous life with them. And very often scars and marks on the body show where a fatal wound was in a previous life. For instance, the famous birthmark that Gorbachev has on his forehead. That almost certainly, I would say, is where he was struck with something, perhaps a sword or something, that killed him in a previous life. Or it might have been a bullet wound, but the sort of bleeding there, it's kind of imprinted on the soul somehow and comes through into the next life. And there are many other instances of this that happen with people, and something of previous lives do show through people. Of course, most people have not a clue who they were in their previous life, so it's not something that you can really test that easily. And even if they do know, they probably haven't got a statue or portrait to compare with. So we don't know what most people in the past looked like. But we're lucky with the Roman emperors that there's loads of statues of them, and we can make comparisons. Anyway, with Vladimir Putin, we see a certain coldness and ruthless streak familiar with Caesar. He is also, like Caesar, a consummate politician. He moved up the ranks from lowly KGB officer to autocrat in the space of just a few years. Yeah. Will he, like Caesar, be assassinated? And that's the remaining question, I think. However, the death of Caesar did not save the Roman Republic. His mantle passed to his nephew and adoptive son Octavius. He avenged Caesar's death and then defeated his own rival Antony. Under his assumed title of Augustus, he became Rome's first emperor. So assassination may not be the best solution for removing Putin from power. What Russia really needs is a popular revolution that might restore democracy. However, the omens are not good. It is more likely that another leader, as bad as Putin, will emerge. So there you have it. I don't think he's actually the Antichrist or the figure that is being talked up. Actually, it doesn't even mention the word Antichrist in the book of Revelation. That's actually in, I think it's the letters of St. John that you find that in the epistles in the Bible. But anyway, I think he is anti-Christian in the true sense of the word, in the sense that he doesn't seem to have much compunction about murdering and killing people and liquidating them and poison pen darts and all of that stuff going on. That's not the behaviour of a true Christian. He uses the Orthodox Church as a tool for his own ambitions. There's no doubt about that. But I don't believe that he's a true Christian, and I think we can safely say that I don't think Jesus would be very, very happy with him, let's say, after he does pass. There is talk about that he's ill, that he's got throat cancer. I don't know the truth of that any more than you do. But we should probably see in the next sort of year what's going to happen. As for Ukraine, I have this strong suspicion that Ukraine will break free, but I don't think it's going to be the end of the story. There's more to come from Russia. And eventually I can see it being one of the heads of a larger empire that grows, that is the seven-headed beast, which will include not just Russia but also Europe, perhaps America, maybe India, China, and one or two other places, forming this universal world empire, supposedly to bring peace to the world, but actually a dictatorship. That is what we're really being warned about in the book of Revelation. So I hope you enjoyed this lecture. As I say, please give us a like if you did, and think about subscribing to the channel. But also, if you are interested in my work, and I've done over 100 lectures now, I think, we have a college, the Invisible College. It does exist, and we have members, and you can join that very easily through patreon.com. So if you go to patreon.com, look up Adrian G. Gilbert, and you'll find me, and you'll find out how you can join the college. It doesn't cost much, only a £5 a month, the price of a pint of beer where I live. So it's not a big strain. It shouldn't be. And the higher levels of the college as well, if you're feeling more generous. But that's all it really needs to be for you. And you'll get newsletters. You get some of these lectures, go to them first. Some are probably only going to be shown to people in the college who've made a commitment. Others I show there first and then put out for general release later. So thank you very much for your time, and look forward to speaking to you again. Goodbye.